On this Sunday night, the volunteers risking their lives in Libya.
It's quite a massive risk that they are facing right now.
Overwhelmed aid workers struggle to cope with the magnitude of the disaster. A sigh of relief in the Maritimes. Post-tropical storm Lee fades, but leaves behind quite the cleanup. Ukraine's next phase.
It is a humbling experience.
The crucial training from Canadian soldiers.
You're scabs.
Backlash and backpedaling. Drew Barrymore deletes a tearful apology amid the Hollywood strike.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
The scale of the destruction is almost unimaginable. Buildings, even entire neighborhoods, flattened or simply washed away when two dams broke, flooding the Libyan city of Derna. Drone footage shows how the torrent of water carved deep channels through what had been once homes, schools, mosques, and shops. Good evening and thanks for joining us. Before the floods hit, Libya's government was on the verge of collapse. Now, as Dan Spector reports, though help is slowly trickling in, that instability is making it difficult for aid crews and volunteers on the ground.
Rescue teams in Derna, Libya spent their Sunday painstakingly searching for signs of life in a mud-caked wasteland where hundreds of buildings have been reduced to rubble. Mostly what they find is death. As a Libyan, when I hold bodies, I cry, says this volunteer. I can't hold my tears. A raging wall of water tore through the center of the city of over 100,000 people, washing entire residential blocks out to sea. The United Nations now estimates 11,300 people were killed, with 10,000 more missing. Libyan officials dispute that, saying the death toll is 3,200. That disagreement, a sign of the complicated road ahead in a country that lacks a strong central government. I saw people dying in front of me. I saw death, says this woman. Building this home where she and her husband raised their children was a lifelong dream. In an instant, that dream became a nightmare.
We are witnessing quite a high increase of the basic needs of the survivors, the affected population that survived the flooding, as they lack everything from proper shelter, food, water, medicine.
Help is arriving. Rescuers from France set up this field hospital. Teams from Algeria could be seen searching the rubble on Sunday. Over a dozen countries are involved in relief efforts, but getting supplies to where they're needed is complicated.
The flooding caused quite severe damage on the vital infrastructure, namely the roads and the bridges.
Adding further difficulty to recovery efforts, the International Committee of the Red Cross says landmines left behind in previous military conflicts were strewn about by the waters, meaning just combing through the rubble could prove deadly for international aid workers and volunteers.
Quite a massive risk that they are facing.
She says more teams en route will attempt to calculate just how much food, medicine, and other basics will be needed in the coming weeks, months, and possibly years. Dan Spector, Global News.
Before even stepping behind the bench for the team, Mike Babcock has resigned as the head coach of the NHL Columbus Blue Jackets. The former Toronto Maple Leafs coach, who at one point was considered the best in the league, had been in hot water since a former NHL player said he demanded to see pictures on his players' phones. Babcock says it wasn't an invasion of privacy, rather a way to get to know his players. Still, the Players' Union launched a review and updated the league Friday on its findings. The summer break for MPs ends tomorrow and Parliament is back in session. The Liberals and Conservatives have both wrapped up caucus meetings in the past week or so, and there is, of course, no shortage of issues affecting Canadians to square off over. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stephenson, joins us now. Mercedes, thanks for being with us. What will be the strategy for the parties going into this session?
Well, it's really a tale of two party leaders with very different political fortunes over the summer that have changed fairly significantly since we would have last talked about this in around June. For Justin Trudeau, this has really been the summer of discontent, not just with Canadians, where he's seeing significantly sliding poll numbers that he should probably be quite concerned about, but also within his own caucus and his own cabinet. And it seems like nothing he's been able to do has changed the channel. They haven't come up with any sort of new grand strategic ideas, which might be what's needed. Some Liberals think it might be the question of whether they need a new leader. And if that's the case, he's going to have to fend off leadership rivals as well going into the fall. For Pierre Poilievre, it's about maintaining this new momentum that he's gaining. He is 15 points ahead of Justin Trudeau, according to some of the polls. That is quite significant. He has softened his image over the summer. We've been introduced, and for many Canadians introduced for the first time, to a new Pierre Poilievre. We've met his wife. We've met his children. He's in a T-shirt. He doesn't have glasses on. And he's really focusing on something that a lot of people are thinking about all the time, and that is how difficult it is to pay their bills. If he can maintain that, which he needs to going forward, and convince Canadians that he is an alternative to Justin Trudeau, that really is going to be his goal for the fall, as well as starting to define his policies and his platform.
And he has time to do that. I mean, the next federal election is still 2 years out. So is there a chance he's peaked too early?
So that's a great question, because it's always a danger for opposition leaders. We have seen various opposition leaders peak, and it looked like they might overtake the government, and then they essentially step on some self-created disaster and sink into that trap. He'll have to be able to avoid it, but he's really focusing on messaging that he thinks is going to register. Take a listen to what he had to say about transit and housing last week.
My common sense plan will require high-density housing right next to transit stations. Look at this appalling scene behind me today. Look at this. Just take a moment. What do you see here? You see a transit station. Where's the housing? So we're spending billions of dollars on transit stations across the country where there are no people allowed to live.
So Pierre Poilievre is going to need to come up with actual plans to do things if he wants to be elected. Justin Trudeau is going to have to convince people he has a new, bold vision 8 years in. Those are both tough things to do, and Farah, we're still potentially 2 years out from the next election.
That's right. But this week ahead, I know you'll be paying close attention to what happens. Thanks so much. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Thanks. Also this week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will travel to New York to address the UN General Assembly. His forces now claim to have retaken a tactically important village south of the frontline city of Bakhmut. Military officials released a video showing Ukrainian soldiers holding flags in front of destroyed buildings. Ukrainian forces have been conducting offensives north and south of Bakhmut for months, ever since it fell to the Russians in May. Today, Canada's defence minister joined Canadian troops at a training base in England, where they held a special salute to a group of Ukrainian recruits departing for the war. Global's Redmond Shannon was there.
A somber salute from Canadian troops as 4 busloads of Ukrainian forces head home from this British military training camp.
These soldiers that come through here are fighting for their freedom, their homeland, their families, and their future. And it is an absolute privilege to be a part of that process and help them to do that.
170 Canadian soldiers have been based at this camp for the past year and have trained 2,600 Ukrainians, part of Canada's Operation Unifier, to help build Ukraine's military capacity. The majority of the Ukrainians who come here were, until recently, civilians, and after a 5-week intensive training program, go home to Ukraine to fight in a war.
We just need to push the enemy from our land, these bastards.
Grizzly is a furniture maker and is married with 2 kids. He never held a gun before coming here.
I really enjoy being here, especially Canadian instructors. They're tough, but still I do enjoy working, training with them.
As part of his visit to Europe, Canada's Defence Minister Bill Blair stopped by for the salute and to meet the Canadian trainers.
The training that's being provided here, I believe in the evidence that the Ukrainians have provided us, is actually saving lives. It's helping them be far more effective in their military response to Russian aggression.
Blair also announced that some of Canada's previously pledged financing to Ukraine will go toward air defence systems.
My perception is that Canadians overwhelmingly understand, not unanimously, but I think very overwhelmingly, there's a strong consensus of our responsibility to support Ukraine.
Canada has pledged more than $8 billion in aid and military assistance to Ukraine since the start of Russia's full invasion. But it is many of these new recruits who will pay the ultimate price. Redmond Shannon, Global News in the southeast of England.
In Atlantic Canada, crews are now working on power restoration and cleanup after post-tropical cyclone Lee made landfall yesterday. The storm brought with it fierce winds and heavy rainfall, at one point knocking out power for more than 200,000 people between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Yet, despite all that, as Callum Smith reports, it didn't cause the damage some had feared.
Crews continue to clear debris off this Nova Scotia road, making significant progress compared to Saturday. Lynette Barnes was ready for it and captured these photos to help tell the story.
This ocean, this road, and the pond behind me were one yesterday. And even on top of that, there was still 30, 40-foot storm surge coming in. I've never seen anything like it.
Meanwhile, at the Halifax airport, flights are resuming, although it's taking some time to get back up and running after they were all halted during the height of the storm Saturday, changing up plans for some.
2 days so far, and we are hoping to get out tonight on the plane they said was ready this morning.
I expected to come to the airport today and see people laying all over the floor, sleeping on their luggage and lines. I was just shocked at how in control it seems.
Some trees were hammered to the ground in the historic King's Square in St. John, while a few roads took a beating outside the Fredericton area. Across the region, internet and power outages persist, although the number of people off the grid has shrunk. At the peak of the storm, nearly 300,000 customers across Nova Scotia were without power.
We don't have the estimated times for restoration for everybody, but we do know that a significant number will be restored today and a lot more tomorrow as well.
Lee was initially heading straight for Yarmouth in southwestern Nova Scotia.
The concern was there, and what we got was a lot less than expected, so all good.
Allowing some Maritimers to breathe a bit of a sigh of relief, at least this time. Callum Smith, Global News, Halifax.
Now, Lee has lost much of its strength, but the hurricane season still isn't over, with more storms ahead. Global News Chief Meteorologist Anthony Farnell is in Nova Scotia. Anthony, how are conditions there right now, and what other systems should we be watching out for?
Farah, the Bay of Fundy behind me, much calmer today than it was yesterday as Lee was moving by. That system now weakening quickly, moving across Newfoundland and heading back out into the Atlantic. Now, the Atlantic hurricane season just reached the midway point last week. As far as storms go, there's another one in the Atlantic, Nigel, expected to become a major hurricane, according to the National Hurricane Center, over the next couple of days. Big waves are once again a possibility for the Atlantic shores, but the center of Nigel will stay well off the coast as it recurves into the Atlantic. The following name would be Ophelia. That may too develop in a couple of days' time, and the latest predictions are for the next few weeks to remain very active. The big question is, do any of those names end up making their way back into Atlantic Canada? And as for right now, it's just too early to tell. One thing that I will note is that with a warming Atlantic, and those ocean temperatures are definitely warmer now than a couple of years ago, that affects the strength and size of these systems as they come ashore, and that's what we've seen lately.
Okay, Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell in Nova Scotia, thanks for that. The relentless fight for action and answers in Canada's landfills. Coming up, tomorrow's day of protest and growing calls to keep searching for secrets buried beneath the waste. Calls to search a Winnipeg landfill for human remains are growing. People across Canada will gather tomorrow for a day of action to show solidarity with the families of 2 Indigenous women whose bodies are believed to be buried there. Catherine Dornian reports.
Tomorrow, protesters will bring a message to governments across the country. Rallies are planned in major cities from Victoria to Halifax. In Winnipeg, where the movement began, organizers say hundreds will take to the steps of the Manitoba legislature.
We share experiences, we remember our loved ones, we say their names, and we remind the people that we are people.
These protests reignited in July after Premier Heather Stephenson refused to support a search of a Winnipeg area landfill for the remains of 2 Indigenous women. Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron were killed last year, along with 2 others, Rebecca Contois and Buffalo woman, who remains unidentified. A Winnipeg man is charged with first-degree murder in their deaths.
So we're going to keep getting louder. You're going to keep hearing our voices.
The call to search the landfill has galvanized both Indigenous people and allies all across the country. Priscilla Omulo, organizing tomorrow's protest in Victoria, says the story of these women has touched a nerve.
There's a level of, for Indigenous folks, could I be next? And for the non-Indigenous folks, trying to figure out, how do I be an ally? Where do we go from here? What do I do?
She believes Canadians are experiencing a watershed moment of reckoning with colonial history. And this demonstrates that the promises of reconciliation need to be backed up with concrete action.
People are speaking of reconciliation and they think it's moving along just fine, but a genuine step would be to bring these women home to their families.
Tara Martinez in Winnipeg says it will be a powerful day and hopes this is the last protest they will need to do.
Feels good to know that our voices have reached far and wide. All eyes are on the landfills right now.
Knowing how many people have heard the call, she's now looking to politicians to answer it. Catherine Dornian, Global News, Winnipeg.
The Olympics of oil and gas are taking place in Calgary. Ahead, the energy transition promises and pitches from the World Petroleum Congress. Calgary is hosting the World Petroleum Congress this week, bringing together 5,000 delegates from more than 60 countries. Now, the theme of this year's meeting is energy transition. But as Heather Yorks-West explains, this isn't a conference about reaching climate targets.
The World Petroleum Congress has come to Calgary with delegates from around the world focusing their attention on the future of oil and gas.
There'll be 2 billion more people on the planet by 2050. How are we going to make sure that everybody has the energy they need in a way that's affordable and reliable?
The energy transition is top of mind at this year's 4-day summit with a focus on the industry's plans around the world to decarbonize. In Canada, the top oil sands producers have formed the Pathways Alliance. On track, its president says, to get the industry to net zero by 2050.
As one of the major oil producers in the world, it comes with a responsibility to also be a leader in energy transition and in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, because we know the urgency of the climate imperative.
But critics point out the energy industry is far from focused on the transition alone. In August, the new CEO of Suncor, a member of the Pathways Alliance, told shareholders the company plans to shift focus back to its core operations. We have a bit of a disproportionate emphasis on the longer-term energy transition. Today, we win by creating value through our large integrated asset base underpinned by oil sands. The CEO of Shell Canada agrees. If you are a company that is servicing its customers that are still demanding a fossil fuel energy source, it's very difficult to then not provide your customers with that energy they demand, Susan Pierce said.
That's a very clear message that says, until there's a regulatory requirement for companies to actually decarbonize, they're not going to do it.
There will be no emission reduction target agreements at the end of this summit. Organizers say the goal is ultimately for global producers to network and learn. In Canada, though, climate regulations are coming. The promise of a federal emissions cap is deeply unpopular within the industry, but it's a policy Ottawa says will be announced by the end of the year. Heather Yorks-West, Global News, Calgary.
Next, giant steel jaws, the transfer of a huge Canadian T-Rex made of steel. A Chilliwack, BC artist is putting the finishing touches on a giant stainless steel Tyrannosaurus Rex. Kevin Stone's been working on the life-size sculpture for 2 years, building it in sections. And in the coming days, the pieces are going to be trucked to a winery in the Okanagan Valley, where it will be put up and put together, spanning approximately the size of a bus. After facing industry blowback from friends and fans, actor Drew Barrymore says she's hitting pause on the planned restart of her daytime talk show. Now, this all comes after announcing she would be back on the air despite the ongoing strikes in Hollywood. Jennifer Johnson reports.
I deeply apologize to writers. I deeply apologize to unions.
Actress Drew Barrymore posted an emotional apology on social media after announcing she was restarting production of her daytime talk show despite 2 Hollywood unions on strike. But on Sunday, Barrymore put the brakes on her show after pressure and criticism, even from friends.
I love her very much. I grew up with her, but I'm not sure that this was the right move.
The Writers Guild of America, representing 11,000 television, movie, and creative media writers, has been on strike since May, demanding higher wages and clearer provisions in their contracts about artificial intelligence.
This is obviously way bigger than just the Drew Barrymore Show and us three writers. We are out here standing with our union.
SAG-AFTRA, a guild representing over 160,000 actors and others in the entertainment and television industry, also went on strike in July. Barrymore was within SAG-AFTRA strike guidelines to keep production running on her talk show, but anyone writing for the show would be crossing the Writers Guild picket line.
You're scabs.
While many television shows have gone dark or are running repeat episodes, some talk shows not governed by Writers Guild rules because they are largely unscripted remain on the air, including The View and Live with Kelly and Mark. Union leaders blame Hollywood studio heads for the strikes.
It's because of these top-tier, highly greedy, self-absorbed executives that frankly are ruining it for everybody but themselves.
No contracts, no actors.
As tens of thousands remain out of work, the strikes have also been costly for California, where most films and TV shows are produced, costing the state about $5 billion so far. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
And that's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and tonight's Your Canada is the annual celebration of a Canadian hero. 43 years after Terry Fox's Marathon of Hope, his mission to raise money for cancer research continues, and this year's edition saw about 4 million Canadians participating. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.